Hello and welcome. I'm Asuma Katauka and you're watching the World Report on NewsX World. Let's take a look at the top headlines of this hour. U.S. Secretary of State Marco Rubio said Washington applauds Paz's historic push to open Bolivia to global markets as the U.S. welcomes economic reforms announced by Bolivian President Rodrigo Paz, saying the changes could boost foreign investment and benefit both countries. Nigerian's foreign minister has said Burkina Faso had released 11 personnel of the Nigerian Air Force who were detained on 8 December after their aircraft made an emergency landing. This comes as Burkina Faso's military regime led by Ibrahim Traoré released the personnel after meetings with a Nigerian delegation. Europe's top court has ruled that Poland's constitutional tribunal breached fundamental principles of EU law and cannot be considered independent or impartial due to irregular judicial appointments. The decision targets judicial reforms pushed by the Nationalist Law and Justice Party during its 2015 to 2023 rule. Europe's top court ruled that Denmark's 2018 ghetto law, which forces relocation from minority-heavy neighborhoods, could violate EU anti-discrimination rules and amount to ethnic discrimination. The ruling by the European Court of Justice backs legal challenges from residents and deals a blow to Denmark's tough integration policies. The U.S. Senate has voted to pass the Department of Defense budget bill for fiscal year 2026, which included the repeal of the Caesar Act imposed on Syria since 2019. The bill won the support of 77 senators as Syria's Minister of Foreign Affairs and Expatriates, Assad Hassan al-Shaibani, thanked the U.S. Senate. The World Bank and Syria's Ministry of Agriculture has begun discussions on a support program aimed at addressing key priorities in the country's agricultural sector. They met via video conference, including Isabel Liu, the bank's agricultural sector lead for Syria and Lebanon. British police said a court hearing for Britain's Duke of Marlborough, Charles James Spencer Churchill, is charged with 3 counts of intentional strangulation, and he was adjourned. However, a new hearing date has yet to be set. The United States has approved a record $11.1 billion arms package for Taiwan, including HIMARS rocket systems. This comes as Taipei plans an additional $40 billion in defense spending, which could further strain U.S.-China relations. Now, for this hour, we start with Australia. The Islamic State group has praised the deadly mass shooting at the Jewish festival at Bondi Beach in Australia, describing the attack as a source of pride but stopped short of claiming responsibility. The message was posted on the extremist group's Telegram channel. Australian police say that they are continuing to investigate the attack, which left several people dead and injured, while stressing there is so far no confirmed link between the shooting and Islamic State. In a separate development, police in Sydney intercepted 2 vehicles and detained 7 men following a tip about a planned violent act, but authorities say there is currently no connection to the Bondi Beach attack. Meanwhile, Israel is probing possible state involvement, including a potential Iranian role, as international concerns over the attack continues to grow. Now, for this discussion, we welcome Professor Andrew Latham. He's an international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for joining us. Good to see you. Professor, now, what are we to make of this praise from ISIS? And how do you think this is going to be affecting the image and how Australia has dealt with this crisis?
I think it's important to recognize that there was neither a claim nor probably the reality of a command and control relationship between Islamic State and the 2 attackers. It's not like somebody issued an order and they carried it out. That's not the way this works typically. There are 2 other dynamics that are interconnected at play here, one of which is Islamic State and similar groups and the ideology that they espouse likely, obviously, inspired these two murderers to commit their heinous crimes against that Jewish population. And on the other hand, even though it didn't issue the orders, ISIS is happy to capitalize on this event. It continues their efforts to project themselves as being relevant, as being players. And so to capitalize on this in terms of a media and social media environment is hardly surprising. So no command and control, in all likelihood. That's probably traceable back to Tehran, but certainly inspiration and very, very certainly capitalizing on the media exposure for their cause.
You know, since you rightfully mentioned, and many reports suggest that these things or media coverage do empower these kind of terrorist organizations. Also, some individuals who watch these things and then get emboldened or confident to carry out such. How do you think? How should media cover these things, and what responsibility does media hold in covering these things?
Well, it's a broad brush. I wouldn't want to tar all media with it. Some media are very responsible. They report the facts. They do not valorize anything other than human dignity and the loss of human life and the affront that is to human dignity. But other media outlets that are more closely tied to the jihadist cause, the so-called anti-Zionist cause, which is blurred into simple anti-Semitism, they are a little less, let's just say that they adhere to the norms and standards of respectable media far less closely. They are often mouthpieces for particular governments or particular movements. And then quite apart from traditional media, there's the whole social media ecosystem, which is full of echo chambers, in which narratives like this will bounce about amongst a particular audience, which will find it to be very gratifying, will find it to be very rewarding, and will inspire and embolden them as well. So we've really got these two media environments. I think one, certainly the conventional, traditional media is relatively responsible, and it's the way it's covering this. Others, not so much, and social media simply beyond the pale.
Thank you very much for sharing that, Professor Andrew Latham. Please stay with us as we come back to you for our next discussion as well. Now we stay in the region. We move on to U.S. President Donald Trump has demanded that Venezuela return assets seized from U.S. oil companies, citing the issue as justification for a new blockade of sanctioned oil tankers traveling to or from the country. Trump has said Venezuela illegally took U.S. oil rights years ago and claimed the U.S. would no longer allow tankers tied to sanctions to pass freely. The move escalates pressure on Venezuelan leader Nicolas Maduro, whom the Trump administration accuses of drug trafficking and corruption. U.S. forces recently seized an oil tanker off of Venezuela's coast amid a major military buildup in the region. While Trump suggested Venezuela's oil funds criminal activity, U.S. officials clarified that the blockade applies only to vessels already under sanctions. Venezuela has condemned the actions as piracy, appealed to the United Nations, and called for an emergency Security Council meeting, warning the situation risks further regional instability. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Professor Andrew Latham. He is international affairs expert, joins us live from Minneapolis. Thank you very much, Professor, for staying with us. Now, how is this U.S. blockade on Venezuelan tankers and now Venezuelan blockade or sanctions towards U.S. or taking these actions? How do you think both of them are justifying their actions?
Well, they're justifying their actions in terms of whatever the real motives, and we can certainly get into that, but they're justifying their actions in terms of international law, especially international, on the American side, international customary law of the sea, and the United Nations conventions on the law of the sea, which the United States hasn't ratified but has scrupulously adhered to since it came into effect many, many years ago. Both are claiming legality. For Venezuela to claim that the U.S. is committing acts of piracy is ludicrous. It has no roots in any customary or unclose international law. It's simply a fantasy, but it sounds good, and it sounds like an appeal to customary international law. And for the United States to claim the right to seize these tankers, it's doing so under the auspices of international law. So both of them are looking to legitimize their actions by appealing to international law, whether it's positive law written down on paper or customary law, tradition, etc. And it remains to be seen which side will prevail. As to the other moves on the part of the Venezuelan government, they're also claiming that they have the legitimate right to do these things under international law, and Washington is claiming that these are violations of the norms, rules, and principles of international law. So that's the battle space. There's the battle space, the physical, kinetic battle space on the water right now, but there's also this diplomatic, legal battle space in which both parties are deploying whatever weapons they possibly can.
Very insightful, and thank you for shedding light on this issue. With that, I would like to thank Professor Andrew Latham for joining us and sharing that insight all the way from Minneapolis. Thank you very much. Now we move on to Europe. We have a breaking news. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte has warned that Russia would face devastating consequences if it attacks Ukraine again after any future peace deal. Speaking in Poland alongside Defense Minister Władysław Kosiniak-Kamysz, Rutte has outlined a three-layer security guarantee system aimed at deterring renewed Russian aggression. Rutte further explains the Ukrainian security guarantees. Let's listen in.
Putin has to know that after a peace deal, if he would try to attack Ukraine again, the reaction will be devastating. And this is exactly how we are designing these security guarantees. And the security guarantees, as they are currently being designed, have three layers. Layer one is the Ukrainian armed forces. They will be, of course, like in Poland and everywhere in NATO territory, in this case outside NATO territory, in Ukraine, will be the first line of defense. The second line of defense is, of course, what the coalition of the willing under the leadership of the United Kingdom and France have been designing over the last couple of months. How can the Europeans help here, together with Canada, to make sure that the peace will be sustained? And the US, and this is the third element of this, the American president said in August that he wants the US to be part of those security guarantees. And at the moment, discussions are ongoing what that exactly would mean and how then this collective package of security guarantees would look like. That's currently the debate going on. It's extremely important because indeed, after a peace deal, if not NATO, and NATO for practical reasons is not possible now, how do we prevent a further attack?
Now for this discussion, we welcome Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond, for joining us again. Good to see you. Now, a lot of comments coming in towards Russia today, looking at the latest one from Mark Rutte, that Russia would face devastating consequences. What is your analysis?
Well, thanks very much for having me. A peace like war has to have a strategy, and that strategy has to involve partners, and it has to involve principles. Unfortunately, at this point, the United States under President Trump has opted for a transactional approach rather than a strategic approach. The remarks that you just heard are a reflection of Europe trying to fill the gap in terms of a strategy for peace. There are two basic holdups in regard to the ending of the war, the invasion by Russia of Ukraine. One of them is territory, in which Russia wants a territory that it does not even control at this point. And the second one is security guarantees, because it means absolutely nothing if you have a ceasefire and simply allow Russia to reload, reorganize, to continue the war at a later time to take over Ukraine and to try to restore the old Russian Empire. In 1994, in Budapest, in return for Ukraine giving up its nuclear weapons, the United States, Russia, United Kingdom all guaranteed the sovereignty and independence of Ukraine. But of course, that didn't amount to anything because there were not the mechanism, the troops on the ground, the fighting forces to enforce that guarantee when Russia invaded in its worst violation of UN Charter since the end of World War II. So now we're trying to come up with a guarantee which will mean something in terms of the ongoing independence of Ukraine. The remarks you just heard are an indication that at least parts of Europe are willing to do that. The United States seems willing to do that, but again, that is not known in view of the national security strategy, which has just been issued, which basically throws Europe under the bus and says, Europe, you take care of the problem yourself. Nevertheless, one hopes that the security guarantee part of this will amount to something. If it's not going to be an Article 5 NATO style, it has to be something very similar, which Russia will respect. And at this point, it is not willing to respect any such guarantee.
Yes, 100%. And thank you for shedding light on the background and laying it out all there for us. Thank you very much, Mr. Raymond. Please stay with us. Now we stay on this discussion. As a result of the EU summit, EU leaders to ask EU institutions to urgently adopt instruments establishing a reparation loan based on the cash balances associated with Russia's immobilized assets. EU leaders want the reparations loan to provide financial support for Ukraine as from the second quarter of 2026, including its military needs. German Chancellor Friedrich Merz says Germany is prepared to make available Russian central bank assets held on its territory to support Ukraine as part of a broader European effort to use frozen Russian funds. The move follows pressure from Belgium, where a large share of the assets is located, and comes ahead of a critical EU summit in Brussels. Merz has been campaigning to secure backing for a European Commission proposal to use around 210 billion euros in frozen Russian assets to provide Ukraine to loan. He told lawmakers the step would send a clear signal to Moscow that continuing the war is pointless, and stressed the issue goes to the heart of European security and sovereignty. Now for this discussion, we welcome back Mr. Raymond Vickery. He's an international affairs expert and former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Commerce, joins us live from Washington, D.C. Thank you very much, Mr. Vickery, for staying with us. You know, how dangerous could it be if they decide to use these frozen assets and continue the war for the next 2 years? What are we to make of current situation?
Well, thanks for allowing me to comment on this. Ukraine, in order to continue to resist the Russian invasion, needs two things, which it doesn't have enough of. One is arms, and the second is money. The arms can come from the United States, and indeed have to, because after World War II, the United States actually encouraged Germany and Europe not to rearm. But President Trump has made it very clear that the U.S. will not provide the money. In fact, this administration wants to be paid for the arms which are coming from the U.S. So in order to get the money necessary to continue to resist the invasion, Europe will have to look to frozen assets, which are largely in the hands of Belgium, about $245 billion worth of assets, in order to be able to come up with the funds. The Belgians are very, very wary of this because the seizure of those funds and the disbursement would be an act of war and involve the hostilities directed against Belgium and other halfway war measures. So Belgium is very worried about that. Germany has been a leading supporter of using these funds, and what they're trying to do now is to have a workaround which will pass the legal test, and that is, instead of just seizing the funds, to provide a loan based upon those funds as security. Belgium is very wary of this and is requiring guarantees from Germany and others to hold them harmless if there is, first of all, legal retaliation, and second of all, kinetic retaliation. So this is a very, very crucial part of the equation if Ukraine is going to be able to further resist the invasion. The $245 billion given in the form of a loan or partially loan, and then funds from others would last for another 18 months to 2 years for Ukraine to be able to fight on. And it is hoped that such a time frame would convince some in Russia, if not Putin himself, that continuing the war was not in the interest of Russia. But this goes back to not having really an overall strategy, not having the kind of partnership, the kinds of principles that you need in order to bring about peace. And it is a further indictment of the transactional approach of the United States under the Trump administration, rather than that which had obtained since World War II through NATO and a close partnership between the U.S. And Europe. And now Europe, acting on its own, is trying to come up with these funds in order to be able to continue the resistance to the Russian aggression.
And lastly, building on that, how effective are these using these frozen Russian assets? Do you think it's effective enough to deter or or move to push Russia towards the ceasefire? And since sanctions have not been so effective in ending the war, also the NATO Article 5 like security guarantee is still unlikely.
Well, you can speculate about how effective it will be in influencing Putin and Russia, because their mindset seems to be that of a restoration of the old Russian Empire. But you can be absolutely assured that without these funds, funds coming from either the frozen assets or some combination of frozen assets and contributions from the coalition of the willing in Europe, the Ukrainians will not be able to fight on and will be subject to having been reincorporated, if you will, in the Russian Empire. So the funds are absolutely essential. Can one guarantee that if the funds come forward, that peace will be restored? You cannot guarantee that, but you can say that that is an essential part, a sine qua non, in order to have an opportunity for peace to be restored, because Russia would see that Ukraine was able to continue to fight for another 18 months to 2 years.
Thank you for highlighting that and sharing it with us. Thank you very much. With that, I would like to thank Mr. Vickery for joining us and sharing that insight throughout our news. Now we move on to our next news. Russia's foreign intelligence chief Sergei Naryshkin has said that he recently held a phone conversation with the newly appointed head of Britain's MI6, marking a rare acknowledged contact between senior intelligence officials from these two countries amid strained relations. Speaking to Russian state news agency, Naryshkin has said that the call with Blaise Matrevelli, Britain's new chief of the Secret Intelligence Service, lasted some time and took place a few days ago. He did not provide details about what was discussed. Naryshkin added that Russian intelligence officers operate officially in London, while British intelligence officers are posted officially in Moscow. Now we move on to Africa. Egypt has said that it fully supports Trump's vision for ending Sudan's war. Egypt said it is following with deep concern the continued escalation and severe tension in Sudan. The presidency reiterated Egypt's commitment to continuing work within the framework of the International Quad framework to reach a humanitarian truce, leading to a ceasefire, including the establishment of safe havens and humanitarian corridors to provide security and protection for Sudanese civilians. The war in Sudan, ongoing since 2023, has killed scores of civilians and plunged the African country into what the UN described as one of the world's worst humanitarian crises. According to the UN, approximately half of the 50 million population in Sudan is currently facing extreme levels of hunger. US President Donald Trump said in November that the United States will work with Egypt, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, and other regional partners to bring the war in Sudan to an end. Now we move on to Bolivia. The death toll from floods have triggered the overflow of a river in Bolivia's eastern region of Santa Cruz. It has risen to 7, with at least 20 people reported missing and hundreds of families left without shelter. President Paz has criticized past administrations for leaving the state without sufficient resources to respond to emergencies. Authorities have warned that heavy rains are expected to continue in the coming days. President Paz met with experts, his cabinet, and weather scientists on how to make an assessment on the situation. He has also pointed to widespread deforestation over the past 2 decades as a factor of worsening the floods. Bolivia has lost 10.4 million hectares to the fire in 2014, the worst wildfire crisis in its history. That's all we have time for. Keep watching News6 World for more news updates from around the world.